Welcome back to the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. I'm speaking with Noha Radwan. She's an associate professor of Arabic and comparative literature at UC Davis. And in the first segment, we were talking about Egypt 5 years after Arab Spring and the conditions of repression under the Sisi government. Now we're going to be talking about the Sisi government and what is actually going on in the state of Egypt. And for that, I'm joined again, of course, by Noha. Thank you so much for joining us again, Noha.
Thank you for having me.
So, Noha, let me begin with asking you to give us just a brief mapping of what has happened since Tahrir Square to now, for those who haven't followed the story in detail.
It's really hard to give a brief report on what happened from 2011 till now, but I'll try. So, after the ouster of Mubarak, the country was under the rulership of SCAF, the Supreme Council of Armed Forces, for almost a year. Then they allowed elections. Everyone who was in Tahrir understood that the major political power on the street was the Muslim Brothers. So as the elections panned out, the second round came down to a competition between the Muslim Brothers candidate, Mohammed Morsi, and someone who represented the old regime of Mubarak, Ahmed Shafiq, who was his last prime minister before he was ousted. So a lot of the non-Muslim Brothers secular forces put in their votes with Mohammed Morsi, and the hope was that even though it is the candidate of the Brotherhood, the new president, Mohammed Morsi, would be representative of all the political forces that made this change and the ouster of Mubarak possible. During the year of his rule, this wasn't the case, which led to a divide between the secular and the Islamists. And that divide was really fatal to the revolutionary efforts. I think that divide was really what led to the huge setback that we're seeing right now, because some of the secular activists, agreed or put their weight in with the military and allowed for the ouster of the elected president, Mohammed Morsi. And since then, we have seen this massive repression. We have seen the massacre of the supporters of Mohammed Morsi in their sit-in at Rabaa in August of 2013, and then the arrests of everybody who is associated with the Muslim Brothers. And after that, I mean, it was not that unforeseen that when the government felt like they have repressed and controlled the Muslim Brothers enough, they turned to the non-Muslim brother activists, and now the repression is across the board. So, this is a government that claims to be a civilian government with a president who claims to have been elected, but we all know that this is a government that came via a military coup, and that the election that led to President Sisi being the current president was a sham. It wasn't rigged or anything, but at least I don't think it was. But the participation was very, very low. People kind of took it as a matter of fact that he will be the next president.
And give us a sense of what happened just before. I mean, what happened to Mohammed Morsi, and what was life like for people under Morsi?
I actually was away from the country for all this year, so I really cannot say in detail. But Mohammed Morsi, as president, made a huge mistake when he sided with the remnants of the old state. He actually sided with the military. He was the one who picked Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who was a member of the SCAF, to become chief of staff. The revolutionaries were hoping for measures that would eliminate the members of SCAF from participating in the new government, but he had made a deal with the military to try to become allies with them. Same was the Egyptian police forces. It's actually really ironic that the person who conducted the Rab'a massacre, Muhammad Ibrahim, was the chief of Egyptian police who was put in that place by President Mohammed Morsi. So he wasn't all that keen on getting rid of the remnants of the old regime as much as he was keen on protecting his cohort from the non-Muslim Brothers revolutionary forces. And that was bad. That created the rift. In 2013, in the summer of 2013, I was in Egypt at that time, it was clear that the divide between Islamists and seculars had become deeper than the divide between those who want to see the revolution move forward and those who don't care to see that happen and are, kind of reluctantly accepting or complacent with the idea of going back to the way things were during Mubarak's time.
And let's take up the role of the United States, for example. After the ousting of Morsi, John Kerry in 2013 expressed that Egypt's military was, in fact, he's quoted as saying it was going to restore democracy. Can you give us a sense of how much the U.S. foreign policy has to do with what actually happens in Egypt? And currently complicating the situation is really the fight against ISIS as well. Give us a sense of the U.S.-Egyptian relations at the moment and how much the U.S. has to do with all.
Yeah, the United States position towards Egypt has always been guided by the interests of the United States. It's really kind of an unprincipled and wishy-washy attitude. So we all remember President Obama saluting the revolutionaries in Tahrir. We heard them. They said Silmiya, meaning peaceful, all of that. But he didn't really come through. Because afterwards, when the Egyptian elected president was ousted, last I checked, when the chief of staff walks into the office of the president and arrests him and puts him in prison, President Morsi right now is facing a death sentence, and he has been, in prison since his ousting. That's a coup. That there is no other way to call it. But the American administration has been very reluctant to call it a coup because they do not want to end good relationships that they have cultivated with the Egyptian state since Mubarak's time. And you know that these relationships involve the peace treaty with Israel. They involve a treaty that allows the United States Air Force to use the Egyptian airfield at any time. It allows them to use the Suez Canal for American ships, civilian and military as well, and to jump line. This has proved very helpful to the American administration during its war in Iraq. And so they're very keen on preserving these interests with the Egyptian state. Any criticism that they make of the Egyptian state, be it, Mubarak, Morsi, Sisi, or anything, it's very light-handed and it's very short-termed because the bigger interest is to maintain the relationship that protects American interests.
Now, with the ISIS raising its head in the Middle East, much of the focus is on fighting back ISIS. How much is the Egyptian government involved in that? And also, how much of a distraction is it in terms of addressing the real issues that is going on to Egyptians?
Part of what the Egyptian media does is it completely confuses all the Islamic movements together, deliberately, I believe. Claiming that the Muslim Brothers and ISIS and every other group that, claims an Islamic affiliation are one and the same. And so they have been terrorizing the Egyptian public with the image of ISIS, taking hold of Egypt as well. And in opposition to that comes the Egyptian military government now as the fighters against terrorism. And I think the American administration has bought this claim that the Egyptian government is their ally in the war against Islamic terrorism, which, if you ask me, is completely contrary to the truth. One of the most interesting editorials about the Egyptian revolution that I read in the New York Times back in 2011 was one by Roger Cohen, in which he said that it is the Arab Spring that is going to be the best antidote towards against terrorism and against these fundamentalist Islamic groups. So in fact, what the region needs more than anything else is a representative government that cares for its people, that actually delivers the equity that has been promised for so many years. That's really the best defense against Islamic militants and terrorism growth in the region. But the American administration is convinced that such a repressive government is, in fact, their ally in a fight against terrorism, which I believe is completely the contrary of the truth.
Noha Radwan, I thank you so much for joining us today and giving us this 5th anniversary take back on the Egyptian revolution.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.